gentlemen, I want to welcome you all to the K. Abdul Mahid podcast. Tonight, we're bringing you Series 2 of Civic Engagement. If you remember, in November, we had the first series during the heat of the election. You know, me and James Taylor, we break down Black politics, the vote, what it meant for the Black agenda, and how the election was going to turn out. And we made some bold prediction during that time election, the day before. My man, James Taylor, made a bold statement. He said that Black people are on a spiritual journey to be free.
Right.
And that statement, that was a very profound statement, and he stuck with me. I was like, wow.
That's right.
If we are on a spiritual journey to be free, there's nothing could stop us.
That's right.
And here we are, almost 100 days, Biden won, and now we have a democratically elected president and vice president. And now we are back, this time and frame, in a different setting, in a different environment, in a different climate, and we are talking about civic engagement again. This time, Series 2. And there's no other topic but the murder trial of George Floyd, which is referred to as the trial of the century. So I want to welcome my man, James Taylor. Welcome to the K. Abdul Mahid podcast.
Yes.
So James Taylor, you received the trial for over 3 weeks. It played out on television. The whole world was watching it. So without further ado, give me your take about the murder trial of George Floyd.
Yeah, I've had a lot of time, like a lot of people, to process after, now that the verdict is in. All of us had high anxiety, even those of us who were in denial and trying to act as if we weren't really affected by the verdict or by the trial proceedings. We were trying to, deny it and not look at it, not acknowledge it. It wasn't important. When the verdict came down, it was like OJ 1994 all over again for Black America, because it was like Black America saying, we don't believe you're going to do the right thing, but maybe you will. And that was the skepticism that was in play, I think, for many African Americans and others. I think many young people who are not Black, Latino, Asian, white, who also are skeptical about the workings of the system. So, you have to sort of almost have a psychologist sitting here first and then talk to a political scientist, because we have to deal with the mental part of what we all just went through, the emotional part of what we all went through. And we just went through it again in January. I mean, November. You have to think about that. We went through this emotional roller coaster from the presidential election, the impeachment before that, then the uprisings in January, and now we're dealing with, with the George Floyd uprising, prior to January. And so, it's almost like, we're in this this state of movement. And that's what I really think is happening, is I think we've been involved in a movement that is as long now as the civil rights movement. Most people don't understand that the civil rights movement lasted 13 years. When Oscar Grant was killed on Fruitvale Station, December 31st, 2008, that is the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. Not when Black Lives Matter was recognized by the national media, but Black Lives Matter really began in Oakland on Fruitvale Station 5 years earlier when Oscar Grant was killed, because two of the members of Black Lives Matter literally were in that movement on the ground, following Uncle Bobby and others here in Oakland and their family. And that's where Black Lives Matter was born. So Black Lives Matter is really the child of a local Oakland movement. That's why it's important to understand the importance of the West Coast, of San Francisco, the case of Alex Nieto, Mario Woods, and many others, young Andy Lopez. That's what inspired Kaepernick. Kaepernick was in San Francisco, right? Black Lives Matter came out of Oakland. Occupy ended in Oakland. Occupy did not end in New York where it began. Occupy ended in Oakland, California on Broadway and 14th, where Oakland took attention from New York and brought the attention to Oakland, California, where all of the issues related to gentrification, housing, employment, displacement, all of those issues were front and center in Oakland. And so when you think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the entire era, we've been involved in a 13-year-long struggle. That's what people need to understand. It really begins with Jena, Louisiana at the high school with the noose. When young people mobilized 30,000 black folk down to Jenna, Louisiana, that had 3,000 people. That's the beginning of the modern movement, is the noose in Jenna. But in terms of police shootings, it begins with Oscar Grant, because like Rodney King in 1982, Oscar Grant was video recorded. There have been shootings, Sean Bell in New York. There have been others, Amadou Diallo, Patrick Louima, right, in New York. Patrick Dorismond, rather, Adam Louima and Patrick Dorismond. These are New York cases. I'm from New York. These are New York cases. But none of them gained national media extent because they didn't have video. Oscar Grant is the modernization of the anti-police brutality struggle and movement, because the technology of the explanation of Meserly was that he was reaching for his taser. That's a new police explanation, a new technology issue. And then Oscar Grant's death was recorded on camera, and we were able to see his murder. And for that reason, the technology in two ways in the Oscar case really modernizes this entire issue. So we're reacting to Eric Garner because we saw Eric get choked out on TV by Pantanello in New York. And then we also are responding to George Floyd because we saw it, right? We didn't see Sandra Bland. We didn't see Breonna. They had powerful responses because we know what happened to them, or at least, we understand the pain that these women went through before their lives were lost, but we didn't get to video it. We videoed these other cases, and the video technology is what makes it relevant in the 21st century, that we are in the 21st century struggling. And ironically, we are almost like at a futuristic age where we all now have these devices that capture something that's been going on for 150 years. And for 150 years, white folk have built in this immunity to police because they had to trust the cop's word. But right now, this is the revolution. This is the revolution. If you continue to record and continue to document law enforcement violence, be clear, this eventually will undo the built-in trust and benefit of the doubt that law enforcement has. This takes away the benefit of the doubt. If you look at the police report that they wrote after, and it was projected in the media after the Chauvin murder of George Floyd, they sanitized the report. I don't know if you saw that, but they so sanitized the report that it read like it was a Girl Scout cookie sale. Like everything was cool. The suspect was, arrested. He got handcuffed, and he had a medical condition, but the cops got him in the handcuffs and took him to the station, and he died. They didn't say, and they said there was absolutely no weapon used, as if the knee or the hand or the elbow or the human body is not a weapon. So again, for me, we're in a struggle for the long haul, and they don't understand. They don't understand what we understand, because we are in a struggle for freedom over time.
JT, so basically, that's a key point. When I saw that report and I read that report, like you say, it's almost like reading like a Girl Scout cookie. He has nothing about no violence. He has nothing about no knee. He has nothing about no struggle. He didn't even mention about him passing away. Yeah. They basically said that he went to the hospital and paramedics somehow were trying to resuscitate him.
Right.
So we saw how it played out. So it's a brand new day. But then, just before the verdict was read, we have had 4 different killings. Yeah. 4 different killings.
Yeah. So we're 8-1. We're 9-1.
So that brings us to the first question, which is the post verdict.
Right.
What happened?
Yeah, we're 9
post verdict.
If you think about it, speaking of Oscar Grant, if you look online, 2 weeks ago, the police officer, the second cop who killed Oscar Grant, was not charged. The police officer who covered the head of the African-American gentleman who was having a mental problem in Rochester and who was naked in the snow, the one they murdered and injected, those cops weren't charged. In Aurora, Illinois, Elijah McClain, the 23-year-old boy, the nerdy boy that was minding his business, walking in the snow, who they killed and they injected with poisons and from the paramedics. All of those officers in the last month and a half, while we were in the George Floyd Chauvin trial, all got off. So I'm saying to you, and I said this in a recent interview I did, that basically whether or not George Floyd's murderer, Chauvin, is convicted, the outcome is going to be basically for the last month, about 5-1. So we've lost 5 of those cases I just mentioned, and you got Chauvin. And since Chauvin has been convicted, you've already seen a white woman go who had 25 years of experience, doesn't know the difference between a pen and a phone. That's basically what she's saying. She don't know the difference between a pen and a phone, but she's been the master of a pen and the master of a phone for 25 years. But then when it comes down to seeing a mixed race black boy who had a white mama, get up out of his seat and sit back down. Somehow he was so out of control that he warranted deadly force. And that's what that's what you're the lawyer. This idea that it's acceptable for police to kill is something we have to begin to push back on. Just like abolition of policing sounds crazy, maybe we need to ask why do police kill? I mean, we're in the 21st century. Are we not modern human beings? Yes, there's bad behavior, there's deviance in society, there's crime and criminality. Most of the social problems and crimes that we have come out of the economic system. If you fix capitalism, you could almost eliminate crime, but we're not going to fix capitalism because it produces crime. And crime itself also is very profitable for those who aren't in the game or in other areas. And so crime, you think about this. I think we need to be talking about reparations. Whenever we talk about talk about crime and punishment, we need to be talking about reparations. You cannot fix the police if you don't fix the community. If the community is broke and poor and desolate and barren and with scarcity and with lack, what do you think is going to be the activity? What do you think is going to be the activity of the community? So you have to recognize that the activity of the community is based on its conditions and circumstances. So until you fix the economic situation of Baltimore, or say, some parts of Chicago, some parts of Philly, and some parts of Boston, until you fix the economic predicament of Black America and Latin America and Asian America, that part that needs support, and poor white people, all, right? This is what the war on poverty was about with the Great Society. It really was an attempt to eradicate poverty for all. And Black folk don't have a problem with white people who are poor getting relief and getting help and getting elevated. Black people love everybody more than everybody else loves them. And so I think what we have to recognize is, even if, Derek Chauvin was convicted, the best we were going to do was 5-1 in the last month. Again, I've been paying attention to all the police officers being let off in footnotes or little quiet announcements. Add them up, and then you add Chauvin, and you realize you're still losing, even when it appears, it feels like there's been some progress in convicting this one police officer of 3 capital crimes, or 3 capital charges. So
JT, so that's you bring an excellent point, and then the topic of this podcast is civic engagement. Because and so the question I was going to ask is, where do we go from here? And that's the ultimate question Dr. King asked during the civil rights movement. Where do we go from here? But there is a clear pathway right now for us to go, and that is the Justice in Policing Act, the George Floyd. Yeah. And that act is being passed by the House of Congress, and now it's in the Senate. They had the first reading, and they have another reading coming up. So if you look at that act, it will fix and solve a lot of the issues that we're dealing with right now. Yeah. So that stuff was on my post earlier on, and I talked about that. It is a very detailed legislation, and if that passed, it will deal with a lot of the issues that we're dealing with right now. But then you're talking about the economic situation. In Dr. King's book, you probably read this point. He said, where do we go from here? He spoke explicitly about economics. Yeah, that's right. About guarantee economics for certain food. That's right. So what's your take? Yeah. Where do we go from here?
I mean, that's what Dr. King was focusing on at the end, was reparations. And he even talked about a GI Bill or a Marshall Plan for the poor. Martin Luther King was supportive of reparations. Martin Luther King understood that the war in Vietnam meant that the monies that were supposed to deal with poverty and the war on poverty for all were redirected to war and to killing poor people in Vietnam. And that's why Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King began making those connections. I think, people have to recognize that we've been in this for 400 years, since the 17th century. We have to bring it to a head. We can't allow others to dictate the terms of this argument. we can't let them continue to be silent while we continue to be hurting and continue to be stressed out and continue to be overlooked at work or overlooked in society, right? So again, you're talking about from 17th to the 21st century, no white revolution of race has happened sufficient to give us the breakthrough that we need. And what I'm saying is you need effectively a white revolution. Black people have had their revolutions. We've been at revolution since we got off the plane, off the slave ships. We've been in revolution. The problem is the white group in America has never had their own revolution for themselves, amongst themselves, to change themselves and to learn how to live side by side with other human beings independent of color. They have not learned that yet. And that's something that is centuries long in lacking in terms, and I'm not talking about individual level. Individuals, that's not really, that's fine. We can all love somebody different who's at an individual level. But when you finish loving that person who's different from you, it doesn't change a damn thing when it comes to the structure of power in terms of white over black. So you can love who you want, marry who you want. That's not even a part of my conversation. I'm talking about the power structure and the power relationship. And that fundamental relationship has not been changed because no white group in America has been serious about it. You have to ask yourself this question: who's in charge right now? The hippies. The hippies and the conservatives like Trump, who are the backlash to the hippies, but the hippies of the 60s and the 70s are in charge of Americans' government and policing and law enforcement now. And yet, you think about this, the most radical generation of white people is in power right now, the hippies. And yet we've had to spend a decade of anti-police brutality marches begging the most radical white group in history, in modern history, I'll say, not since the 20s. In modern history, we're begging them to make our Black Lives Matter. The hippies, the weed people, the sex and drugs and rock and roll people are in power now, and we're sitting here saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Well, you know what? Marijuana is legal. They took care of weed, didn't they? Weed is legal in about 15, 16 states and in DC. Weed got taken care of, and they wanted weed to be legal a long time ago. They got gay marriage passed. Now, LGBTQ marriage is normalized and mainstream, and it ain't illegal anywhere in America. Gays have been completely brought into the mainstream of American society. So we got weed and gay marriage, which were part of the 60s civil rights hippie revolution. And yet here we are, the black part of it is still unresolved. They took care of everybody else. They took care of making weed legal and men marrying men and women marrying women legal, but black people are still illegal in most of America, just as pedestrians. This is a sickness that this country has, and it's got to break it. Black people don't need to change. The system needs to change.
So JT, so chaos or community? Because that's where we are right now. We're at the crossroad. We got to go back to the community and build, or it just don't just be chaos.
That's right.
Where do because we're at an inflection point.
No, I think you're right. We are at an inflection point, and I think that's why it's important. Like people like Tamika Mallory are out on the front line talking and actively mobilizing, organizing. I think it's important. You know, people are very skeptical about the money that Black Lives Matter was given, but I think that's short-sighted. You have to understand, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X died broke men. They both died poor. King got $200,000 for the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't have to die poor. He did not have to. King chose to die poor. He gave his money away to the movement and to the SCLC and not to his children and his wife. And so they were broke except for Harry Belafonte. I think, you have to recognize this recent news and media attention related to some of the members of the Black Lives Matter. I think one of them, Miss Color, is buying some property. That's going to be a distraction, and she's never going to outlive that. That's going to be 50 years from now. People are going to talk about that as some sort of evidence of a sellout. She can't talk that away. They can't, they try to be very dignified. They can offer all the black dignity they want in these explanations and these interesting explanations that they, these nuanced explanations that I didn't get the money from from the Black Lives Matter, mobilizing. I got it from book deals and I got it from contracts that came as a result of my Black Lives Matter activism. So, but again, there's something problematic with this, but at the same time, I appreciate the fact that they are giving money, small, low interest loans or no loans grants to young people at $1,000 a pop. That matters, and that's the kind of thing we need. It doesn't have to be that because the 60s were the 60s that 21st century movements have to act like exactly like those movements. If we can get 90 million, if we can get 400 million, let's take it. But to me, Abdul, at some point, the modern mobilized revolutionary has got to understand that we keep reinventing the wheel that our grandmothers invented. And what I mean by that is we are at Black Lives Matter stage, starting where the Panthers started. We should be starting where the Panthers ended. So we're starting with militancy, black bandanas, black leather, black militancy. But that's where the Panthers started there in '66. When you get to the 80s, the Panthers are feeding the people. So now you're going to rise up in 2013, and you're going to act like the Panthers didn't evolve and start feeding the people. The Panthers got better when they focused on feeding the people. They did not have a following locally in Oakland as long as they picked up the gun. When they put down the gun and picked up the needle for the sickle cell testing, when they put down the gun and picked up the food and the baskets and began demanding stores in Oakland feed the people, that's when the Black Panther Party became transformative. And what I'm arguing is the only next move the modern black movement has, the Black Lives Matter movement has, is to turn back inward to the black community and engage in black community development. The problem with a lot of these people is they're so sold out, so preoccupied with white people's acceptance. They're so busy trying to be everything for everybody, and they want us all to be together. No, that ain't the key for black survival. The key for black survival is black community solidarity and strength. You can love and sleep with who you want, but in terms of black mobilization, it needs to be black and essentially black in order for it to be effective. Now, if you want us all to say nice things, you want me to sound more like Martin Luther King so you feel better? That's fine. But I assure you, it is not the recipe for a successful movement. The more diverse a movement is, the more demobilizing a movement will be.
Chaotic.
Yes, if you have an all-gay movement and bring heterosexuals in, the movement is over. You have an a black movement and bring whites in, it's a problem. You have an all-women's movement and bring men in, women aren't going to operate the same way as they would if it was a room full of women. So don't deprive black people of the very same thing that is natural for the Irish, natural for Indians, natural for the Chinese, natural for Japanese, right? Natural for gays. Yet black people have to ask for permission to mobilize in their name only. And I think we are at the point where we're seeing the country force us to that position. And so I think going forward, the key is chaos or community. For black people, is community so you can survive their chaos.
Yeah.
Their society is in chaos. We have a condition. They have a problem. We have an economic reality that if you gave us reparations, you can deal with most of the problems that black people have. You can't take money and fix the spiritual problem that white America has. White America has a spiritual problem that it cannot fix because it is obsessed on capitalism, materialism, and feeling like you're better than somebody else. Really, because you are the minority on the planet, right? The whole world knows that the world is brown and red and yellow and diverse and beautiful with all kinds of people, right? 7 billion human beings. And here you come 8,000 years later, according to Harvard University, saying all of a sudden, I'm the master race. And you are literally the least common human being type on the planet, but you're running around using that scarcity as a method to say, I am the master race. And you have acted that way. And this is the sickness, is you're acting in 2021 how you acted in 1618, 1712, 1815, 1923, 1967. When are you going to change? This is what Toni Morrison says to Charlie Rose when they have the interview on YouTube. She says, spiritually, they know that we are superior to them spiritually. She says this, Toni Morrison. She says they know. She says, I always felt like I wasn't better than them as human beings, but I knew I was better in terms of how I treated other human beings. And they know it. And that's what tears them apart, is our decency. I've been living long enough, and I've never seen any white family in my life go on national TV and forgive a black person who's done them wrong. Not once in your life have you either. Not once. And yet I can name Botham John, his brother, the court bailiff, the judge in that case, the Dylan Booth, in Charlotte, right? The boy who got shot in Kenosha 7 times by the cop. The mother sat down before she sat down at the press conference when she was taking her seat. She said, "I forgive the police officers and they need training." And Ben Crump sat next to her, and there wasn't nothing else to say. She said, "I forgive you," before she sat down. What more was there to talk about? So my point to you is, some people see this as a sellout and as weakness and as a part of slavery's sort of psychological impacts on Black people. But I think if you look at where the world is today, who are the people offering love? Who are the people offering justice? Who are the people talking about all people are equal? Who are the people talking about the spiritual, talking about prayer, talking about love, talking about forgiveness? Where in white society do you hear this coming? What you see is the attempt to create 300 new laws to keep Black people from voting. You're seeing new attempts to undermine democracy. You're seeing the Supreme Court talk about supporting these attempts to undermine democracy. Right? We are one trial away from Plessy versus Ferguson. You're the lawyer. You know this history. From 1877 to 1896, there was no action. Look at this. There had been the abolition of slavery in 1864-65. Black people get Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. They take it away in every state by 1877. But from 1877 to 1896, it's just this gray area of post-Reconstruction disappointment. And then all of a sudden, one case comes along called Plessy versus Ferguson. And then that interim, when there was no activity from 1877 to 1896, all of a sudden is codified and validated by law. So from 1877 to 1896, state by state, not the US government, state by state, Georgia kicked all of its Black elected officials out of the state legislature. This is where Bishop Henry McNeil Turner writes the piece and argues that God is a Negro, because he was one of the Georgia state legislators who got put out of Georgia's legislature. So Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, you had Blanche K. Bruce, Hiram Revels, you had Black secretaries of state, you had Black people at every level of government in America from 1865 to 1877. That was the window for democracy in America. And instead they came with a Trump-like response and closed the door on that forever, right? That's where we are right now. Again, we are at the point where we are at that 1877 to 1896 interim, where there's no law that says Jim Crow is legal, but the conditions that weaken Black power are continuously happening every day. You look locally, just like in Georgia in the 1870s, everywhere you look. Yesterday, today, Arizona rejected its attempt to do voter suppression. You got Oklahoma doing voter suppression. And other states, right, Georgia doing overt voter suppression. These white people aren't even ashamed, and you're still playing with them. You still think they're going to find a way to be decent? This is about establishing apartheid. That's where we are in America. We're at the point of either going democracy or apartheid. We're at what they used to call in the Mississippi Blues. We're at the crossroads as a people. Now, if you can continue to operate as you always have, thinking this thing is going to work out in some way if you just are passive. But you need to be clear that the only way this is going to be determined is if we fight like hell for the next 50 years. Black people have got, because right now it's wide open. It could go Reconstruction, or it could go Reconstruction disappointment. We're at that point. Now, all it takes is one case. That's what happened in 1877. There was all this racism, but nothing official. All this racism, nothing official. Plessy versus Ferguson. You got a woman who just got on the Supreme Court in a week without a real vetting of her background, Amy Coney Barrett, who apparently in one of her rulings determined in some way that using a white man using the N-word, a boss at the work site, is not a hostile work environment. Now you want to tell me that woman, and she wouldn't even answer, like most of these racists won't, whether or not the Voting Rights Act was a good law, or Brown versus Board of Education was good law. Amy Coney Barrett will not answer about Brown versus Board of Education and whether it was right or not. So you telling me these are the people who have the court's power? What I'm saying to you is we're just one Plessy versus Ferguson type ruling away from being back in the back of the bus, and y'all think y'all don't believe it. You see it with Trump. You see it with policing. You see it with new laws. You see it with racists in the Congress. You see it with this Taylor Greene woman. You see it with these other folk. This is the moment before apartheid, or it's the moment before racial democracy. But we have to decide which road on this crossroads is America going to take?
So JT, you bring us to a good point, and as I stated earlier, this is the whole idea of civic engagement. And I've always noticed that we have had people that fight from all angles. We have people that fight at the voting booth. We have people fight in the military. We have people fight in the court system. We've had people fight in the street, and we have people fight financially. So now we have two laws that are pending. HR 1, which is basically overhauling all the voting rights and all stuff, because we need a federal mandate. That's what we do. We need a federal mandate. And with the Justice in Policing Act, with Judge Floyd. So we need a federal mandate that will just flush down through the system, because we can't afford to have it piece by meal, state by state, city by city. It's not going to work. It's going to take too much of a long time. So that's where we at, and that's why we need to call our Congress people. We need to call our senators to make sure that they pass those two legislation
and send money. I think we need to send money to the causes in Georgia. Anywhere where you see problems, if you like a Republican woman recently opposed, I think she did. I can't remember what she did. Whatever she did, it was so important. I think she voted to impeach Trump. I don't know the woman's name to this day, but for that day, I saw her that she voted against Trump. I wrote a check, sent it to her. I never talked to her again. I've never given a penny to a Republican. I sent that money to her just so she could be confused by the fact that a black man sent her money for opposing Trump, right? I think we have to begin to try to do some more creative politics. I think we're very creative. At the local level, we can do some things experimentally that we can't do at the national level. Now, people might be offended by this, but I'm more about black political independence. And what I mean by that is that, black people have lined up with the Republican Party for 100 years, up until 1964, and they've been with the Democrats for 56 years since 1964. They were Republicans twice as long as they were Democrats. It will take them, blacks being Democrats, another 45, 50 years from 2021 to have been Democrats for how long, over 100 years, they were Republicans. No other group in America is as sophisticated as black American voters. You think I'm being hyperbolic? Think about how a group that's 10% of the country has had a black woman vice president and a black man president, right? Back to back. And then they got the vice president of the black president to be the president so that he could make the black woman vice president his vice president. How do you do that? That's black power, in the same way that San Francisco has 3 to 5% population and a black woman mayor. And if she steps down tomorrow, a black man becomes mayor of San Francisco, Shaman Walton, tomorrow. How is it that African Americans have been so effective politically? The Latino group is young. The Latino group is mostly immigrant. The Latino group is not nearly as sophisticated politically, and it will take decades for them to catch up to the political experience that blacks have had since the 19th century. We have hundreds of years of knowledge and data and experience and victories. We keep calling all of our wins losses. We beat the 13th Amendment. Making movies about them talking about they're making mass incarceration is just confusing us. Harriet Tubman won. You can't say Harriet Tubman won and then make a movie that says the 13th Amendment is mass incarceration. No, mass incarceration comes from April 4th, 1968, when 144 cities in America burned, when Martin Luther King was killed. That is the beginning of mass incarceration. Before the 1970s, nobody in America was mass incarcerated. Not whites, not blacks, not gays, not straights, not Jews. There was no mass incarceration until 1970 and after. And that's a direct response to LBJ and Nixon both signing the 1968 Safe Streets and Violence Control Act, right? And so that is where we get mass incarceration from 1968, not 1868. And to spend our time trying to convince people that the 13th Amendment is about mass incarceration, well, you're having a conversation that's impossible to have. You need to be talking about 1968 and how the state moved to anticipate after they got beat, after we beat the American government with the civil rights movement. The reactionary forces like Reagan and others in the Republican Party mainly, and some in the Democratic Party, organized to do what one woman scholar named Vesla Weaver calls a front lash. They couldn't get us with the backlash, so they did something different. They anticipated. In other words, Vesla Weaver says after the civil rights movement victory, the reactionary forces licked their wounds. We didn't even celebrate it. We're busy talking about ongoing oppressions, but they licked their wounds and then they reorganized. Just like on the night of Obama's victory. On the night that Obama won, all these white reactionaries came together with Paul Ryan, this guy Scalise, who's a deep racist, Scalise. All of these guys come together and they cry on each other's shoulders as men because they felt like they had failed their fathers and their grandfathers by letting a black man become president of the United States. They made a commitment that they will fix this. And that's why you got 300 attempts right now across the country. It's not Trump. Trump is off the scene. Trump didn't go about trying to get 300 new laws to curtail voting of black people, young people, and workers, to limit your hours. What does it tell you panoramically about the country that you live in, that it is making at the state level concerted efforts to undermine democracy? But as soon as Russia or China or some other country raises up, America's quick to talk about democracy. Black people have always been the asterisk on America's democracy. In fact, we are the democracy in America. Black people are America's democracy. We are the democracy, because without us, there would be no democracy. There would just be white oligarchy or aristocracy based on race. But because we are here, there is democracy. I read an article the other day in the Atlantic you should Google it. It's called The Forgotten Founding Father. And it documents how Prince Hall of the Masons, the father of black masonry in America in Boston, was in Boston when the country was being created. You know, Crispus Attucks was in Boston. David Walker was in Boston, and as well, right? And so the idea was that black people were going to be with Prince Hall, right? Prince Hall was also there. The article argues that Prince Hall, not Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Jefferson, Madison, or Franklin, but that Prince Hall was the first person in human history to take the Declaration of Independence's preamble that says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and applied it to social justice. White folk, as they used it, Jefferson, Jay, and Franklin, as they used it, they were talking about a military, a Declaration of Independence. It was a war document. Black folk, according to this article that just came out last month about Prince Hall, called The Forgotten Founding Father, says that he, a black man, is the first man in human history to apply the Declaration of Independence to American society. And he applied it to black people because he supported Back to Africa and he supported other types of programs. Prince Hall was the leading black man in America in the 18th century, in the 1780s, started the Masonry movement, and was very powerful in Massachusetts. But he also is why we all, every day in America, of every race and color, say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It was not thinkable to apply it to people when it was created in 1776. But Prince Hall came along and looked at it and said, they hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. Well, these fools don't mean this when they talk about us. We are going to give this life. So Prince Hall effectively cuts and pastes the Declaration of Independence preamble and says, this is our black manifesto going forward. And I swear to you, if you study the history of black writing, black literary, black speeches, Obama's inauguration, King's I Have a Dream, Frederick Douglass's 5th of July speech, David Walker's appeal, the Nation of Islam's What the Muslims Want, What the Muslims Need, all of them organized around the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And I'm saying to you that black people are the ones that make the Declaration of Independence mean something, because nobody else meant for it to mean anything except a declaration of war. And so the beauty of Prince Hall being one of our people and being the first by the Declaration to human society and groups and struggles, Abdul, is it tells you that we have our own democratic tradition in America. Like I said, that's us being the democracy right there. That's what I mean when I say we are the democracy. It's Prince Hall saying we're applying that to us. It's white folk looking at it and says it doesn't mean anything in terms of applying it to them. They did not apply it to us. That's how we were 3/5 humans still. But Prince Hall said, we will apply it to us. And not only does it work now for us, but it works for all people in the world. When Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese people were seeking independence, they had the Declaration of Independence, right? But you have to understand, the reason why the 1619 Project is so controversial is you have a whole bunch of historians trying to be literal when the sister was being rhetorical, making an argument, and she was saying 1619 is year one in American history, not 1776. And I've seen some silly professors running around, criticizing, with their self-righteousness, the fact that that it wasn't academically and scholastically and methodologically pure. And I'm saying, if you know anything about jazz and blues, Negro, it ain't supposed to be pure. It ain't supposed to be by the rules. That's what being black is. That's what being black is, not following the line, not going with the law, not going with the rule. Saying 1619 is more important than 1776 is black blues and jazz at play. And that's what I'm saying. The same way Prince Hall says that we hold these truths to be self-evident and applies them to us. The 1619 Project is an attempt to say there are ways of being in America. There's a racist way and there's a non-racist way. The racist way is from the dominant group. The non-racist way is from the other major group in America, or groups, plural, including Latinos. So I think when you look at Latinos, Asians in general, Native Americans, you see a strong community sensibility and a strong sense of we. The white man says, I think, therefore I am. Africans don't think that way. Africans say, I am because we are.
Ubuntu.
We are.
Ubuntu.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. So JT, so we have break down what happened, where do we go, and now it brings us to the modern problem that transpired from the 1968 all the way up now, and which has to do with policing in the African American community. And I say this because every one of us, someone, sometime, somewhere, gonna have to come in contact with the police. That is just the nature of how we live right now. This is our life is. And so the problem is that, do we get treated differently by the police? And if so, what are the things and ways that we should try to make sure we minimize this? So I pose the question, as policing in the African American community run amok?
I won't say it's run amok. I think it's run into cameras. It's run into cell phones. It's now being exposed. It has not gotten worse. It's just now getting videoed and recorded. You can listen to Marvin Gaye, brother, and Curtis Mayfield and Nina Simone sing about police brutality. You can listen to Count Basie and Muddy Waters and B.B. King talk about police beating up black people in Harlem or in any city in America. And it was usually some Irish cop who was barely better than the Negro in most of European history. But when they came to America, the Irish became the super Americans. They became Americans on steroids. That's why they hate us the most. The Irish were the ones that sold us out the most, because they were the lowest whites and they were the only people, we were the only people that accepted the Irish. But the Irish, as soon as they got power, in no time, once they were able to recover their old European history in America by just being white and no longer being Irish, nothing helped them more than being able to say, I'm not Irish anymore, I'm white. And that betrayed us, because the Irish, they were our allies. They were the only friends black folk had for a long time. And then the Irish sold us out, right? And so, I mean, this is more convoluted than I have time to deal with. Literally, black folks sent leaders in the Frederick Douglass era to Dublin to negotiate with their leader, Danny O'Connell, to support black Americans in the abolition movement here in America. And he said yes. And the Irish of America destroyed him forever. They're George Washington, the one you hear them sing about, oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling. In every movie when a cop gets shot, that Danny boy, black folk went to Dublin and met with him. Charles Remond met with him and persuaded him to support the black American freedom. And the Irish said to him and to us, sorry, we have to be good whites in America. We cannot support you, Negroes. And so it went back into the politics of Ireland, and it literally destroyed their George Washington. Their George Washington was destroyed for taking a pro-Black American position in slavery, and most Irish people won't admit that to you. But that's how Daniel O'Connell was brought down, for supporting Black America, right? Now, I don't know what your original question was,
so
but I'm off on my tangent.
But that's good. So you basically said policing did not really work.
Well, yeah, well, because I'm talking about the Irish, because the Irish are the police.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's the part of it. You got to deal with that part of it. You can't just talk about policing generically. The Irish had a resentment and a guilt because they know they betrayed us. The first ever race riot in American history was in 1866 in Memphis, Tennessee, the same place that killed King. Immediately after blacks got free, the soldiers were decommissioned, but they were allowed to walk around in their uniforms, and they were just going around in Memphis drinking, and they were young Black men, and the cops were young Irish men drinking, and they were having these clashes. And then the Memphis Police Department, which helped kill Martin Luther King, based on a trial in 1996, the civil trial, actually, played this particular role in engaging in the first race riot ever. Was not against, okay, well, let me correct that. There was plenty against the Native Americans. That's how they genocided them. But I'm talking about when they turned to Black people. The first time there was a race massacre was the Memphis Police Department turned on Black soldiers in the Black community and shot it up right after the Civil War. And what Tamika Mallory said recently when she was talking about Daniel, whatever his name is, from the Breonna Taylor case, Daniel Cameron from the Breonna Taylor case, she said, and people didn't understand this, she said, white people, stop talking about our violence in the George Floyd uprising. She said, you taught us this. She said, we learned it from you. And nobody understood that. But what she was explaining is that there's 100 years of white people being the only rioters in America, period. Nobody else rioted. Indians and blacks did not riot. When blacks moved to the cities, they basically learned that behavior from their white tormentors and decided in the cities, when whites up in Chicago and Ohio and New York all decided they couldn't come, blacks weren't accepted there, blacks said, well, we're going to give y'all a taste of your own medicine. And that's when blacks began burning down cities and rioting. So what's really funny now is that whites are quick to talk about riots, right? As if we created them, not recognizing, like Tamika Mallory said, Black folk are simply showing you yourselves when they riot. When they riot, they're mimicking you, because America ain't nothing but a riot. It's been a riot since you came and took the land from the people. And we're at a point in human history, about 500 years in, where we should be at a point of clarity globally, where we say, okay, let's look at what has happened in the past. Let's fix it and repair. So there should be reparations everywhere. That's why the Caribbean countries are suing the European countries for reparations. Black people deserve reparations, not as a handout, but as a means to giving America the only future it has. America has no future without Black people being elevated. If we stay like we are for another 50 to 70 years, do you think this thing can be sustained? And with the way you feel right now, you think we got 50 more years of this? You think there's 70 more years in our Black tanks to put up with this? Don't you think our tank is about to run out? So I say, for me, it's like, the U.S. Census says that by the year 2050, there will be 75 million Black people in America. Every group in America is exploding except one, right? And I'm saying to you that with that new reality, we cannot have in this country in 2050 a future where you have racist policing and 75 million Black people. There's 41 million Black people right now. So there's 35 million more coming in the next 35 years by 2050. So I'm arguing that racist policing and 75 million Black people cannot coexist. Something's got to give. And since Black people broke the back of slavery, they broke the back of peonage, they broke the back of convict leasing, they broke the back of sharecropping, they broke the back of urbanization, they broke the back of mass incarceration and continue to break its back. Black people have had so many victories because they've had to fight so many battles. But because we keep fighting battles, we never get a chance to enjoy our victories. Think about it. We just had the verdict come down last night. People were celebrating, and then they turned around and there's two of our young people killed on both sides of the verdict. So
So no. You get a great point. That was a great point. And so just last week, somebody was on 60 Minutes. He was talking about the classified racism.
Yeah.
I said,
that's a public health.
A public health crisis.
That's right. That's right.
It was a resounding declaration, but we have knew this all along.
That's right.
And every one of us are fighting a battle.
But see, I don't know if the racism bothers me as much as the economic deprivation. In other words, you can call me and all you want,
but it goes hand in hand.
You know what I'm saying? I agree.
Because if they shut the door down,
I agree.
But if you lack of promotion, lack of opportunity, lack of
elevation,
exposure and elevation. So that's what it is.
I agree.
So they become smarter and being discreet.
Yes.
So up and down the chain of institutions, we have people crying all day long.
Yeah.
And we fight in the same battle from different avenues.
Yeah.
So
I think we have to recognize that we have to do the work of exposing them for who they are. I think that's what we have to do. We have to keep telling them. We have to keep telling them this is who you are. Malcolm said, "You the devil. Don't try to change me by making me feel inferior. You the devil." And James Baldwin said this. James Baldwin said so beautifully, and this is what America still can't deal. They can't deal with Baldwin. When Baldwin says to them, like his friend Toni Morrison, I knew I'm not a nigger. I know when I pray. I know when I go to church. I know when we shouting and singing and when grandmama's cooking. I know that I'm more spirit. I knew that I was someone special, And Baldwin says effectively, the person who invented the nigger is the nigger, not Dr. Frankenstein. Ain't the monster. The monster is the doctor who made the monster. Frankenstein, the physician, is the monster who made the monster. And I'm saying racism is the monster that these monsters racists have made. And
they basically flip it.
They
flip it and tell you that you're and so that's what it is. And this is why we need to educate our masses, and this is why we need civic engagement.
Yes.
Because we are, like you say, we are the democracy in this nation. So JT, that brings us to the last point in my bullet point, which talks about, it go back full circle, is the Second Amendment affront to the Black community. Basically, we know the right to bear arms is a sacred right in the Constitution. But every time we hear a story about a young African-American come in contact with law enforcement, and the moment that they tell them that I have a license ammunition with me, I have a license to carry weapon, it's like you have said the ultimate word. You have said a word that is almost like a death sentence. So at this day and age, at the climate that we have right now, is the Second Amendment affront to the Black community.
I think Black people, it is a racist and historical affront. Michael Moore brought that out in the movie Bowling for Columbine, where he showed how, when Black people got free, white folk went and got guns. And of course, they needed it for Native Americans and for the frontier to hunt as well. But Black people love guns too. I think we need to own the reality that I'm not talking about, like, if you live in New York or Chicago, or Oakland, the gun is one thing. But you got to understand, the Black Panther Party's gun culture, the Black Panther Party for self-defense, that came not from Oakland, that came from Louisiana. They got that from the Deacons of Defense. The gun in the Black Panther Party movement was more about Louisiana and Black Southern culture than West Coast California culture. The gun in the Panthers was a South thing, not a West Coast thing. And that's the interesting thing about it, is that the Panthers pick up the gun because they come from Huey P. Newton is from Monroe, Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana is where the Deacons of Defense came from. So Huey literally in his childhood knew about the Deacons of Defense, Black men who defended Black community against terror. Be clear, I'm for it. We need more of it. We need more groups like the Not Effing Around With Me party to stand up right now. Until there's a resolution, we need people get trained. We need our GIs, our veterans. We need law enforcement. We need them to come into the community to teach people home defense, to teach people self-defense, to teach people all kinds of things, survivalism. This is necessary, not because anything bad is going to happen, but just in case. It's better to be prepared than to be victim. Too often, the first thing they do is disarm us, right? We get disarmed. They take our guns away. That way they can take our capacity to be equal with them away. So I think it's important that Black people own guns. I think Black people need to own guns right now in a record rate. I think we need to go out and buy a bunch of guns and scare them to death in terms of the NRA and this whole liberalization around the Second Amendment. Because like I do, like up in Sacramento, when the Panthers took up the gun, that's when the white folk changed the laws. So we pick up the gun, these white folk are going to change their laws. We need to buy guns in mass. I'm not talking, look, the guns that's killing us in the streets in Chicago and Detroit and Oakland, they already out in the streets. And them folk ain't listening to me, no way. So this ain't even a conversation about that. We can talk about that separately, about urban violence. We're talking about home defense. We're talking about group self-defense. We are a minority in a country that is hostile to us. And it's because they know we have weapons that they're not going to come messing with our homes. Brandy the Norwood, the singer, I was very close with her grandfather, Mr. Bates. Sonia Bates Norwood is the mother, and they can bear witness. Brandy's grandmother, who's now dead, Ray J and Brandy's grandmother, owned a bus company in Macomb, Mississippi. Listen to me. Macomb, Mississippi is where SNCC went in 1964 to organize. When they went to Macomb, Mississippi, Brandy's grandfather owned his own bus company. And the sheriff, and he was loaning his buses out to the Black community to mobilize in Mississippi, Brandy's granddaddy and grandmother. The sheriff refused to give him his license. Brandy's grandmother, who's now in heaven, took her gun. Brandy's grandmother took her gun, went to the sheriff. Brandy's and Ray J's grandmother put a gun to the sheriff and said, "Give my husband his goddamn license." And the sheriff gave her license, and they drove off, and he kept loaning his buses to the bus company, to the movement. They had guns at the house. Brandy's grandparents had guns all the time. All of Black Mississippi had guns. Let me tell you something I just explained to my students the other day in lecture. When you see Martin Luther King give "I Have a Dream," Google image it right now. And if you look at Martin Luther King, he's surrounded by a bunch of Black men with white hats on. All of those men are PD. All of those men are Black cops. All of those men are protecting Martin Luther King with guns. So he can give "I Have a Dream" because Black men had guns. There's another book called "That Nonviolence Will Get You Shot" by Akinyele Umoja at Georgia State. It's called "That Nonviolence Will Get You Killed." And he wrote a book called, Umoja's book is called "We Will Shoot Back." And they both, the book "That Nonviolence Will Get You Killed" and the second book, "We Will Shoot Back," both explain the importance of Black people being armed throughout the Black movement. While Martin Luther King was running around talking nonviolence, everybody was packed. Everybody had a gun when Martin Luther King was talking nonviolence. One reporter went to Martin Luther King's house in 55 and he sat down on a gun. So Black people were Southerners. Southern culture is a gun culture. Black folk or Black Southerners to this day love gun culture. That's why the Republicans do well amongst Black men. That's why the Republicans do well amongst Black men in places like Texas and Oklahoma, is because of the gun thing. So again, I think we have to understand that we need more education, more training, more discipline. We need more gun clubs so we can understand guns as self-defense and understand it proper. It would be irresponsible of me to sit here and preach some "we shall overcome, I have a dream," nonviolence. That was not natural, and it was an anomaly when King offered it. It didn't fit. It had nothing to do with America. He wasn't honest in the sense that he borrowed it from Gandhi, and Gandhi was a nationalist, not an integrationist, right? So King is borrowing from Gandhi conveniently, but Gandhi is an Indian nationalist. King borrows, get some of Gandhi's strategies so that it would work. But that, Fannie Lou Hamer, she didn't agree with Martin Luther King. Fannie Lou Hamer said, she loves everybody, but she has a shotgun in every corner of her bedroom, she said, in case some cracker want to meet her. That's Black. What Martin Luther King was preaching was unnatural to Black people and unnatural to America, because there's nothing nonviolent about America. So to teach it is unnatural. It was an anomaly. And don't forget, they murdered Martin Luther King. So no matter what he taught, he got the bullet, not peace and nonviolence. And so for me, I think we should train more and more people. We need to be, serious about it though. We can even go to law enforcement and get training. I just think, I don't think there's going to be a day where there's this race war with blood and massacre. But I just think Black people need to let other folk know we will take your life from you if you wanted to do harm to us. I think that's the thing that will change the tide, is let folk know an eye for an eye. Might leave us both blind, but I'm not going to be blind by myself. And up to this point, it's just us getting blinded and them not getting blinded. They need to get blinded too. And I'm talking about this in the most figurative sense, because I can see now down the line something coming down the line. Somebody say, "Oh, look, he advocated violence." No, I'm not advocating violence. I'm advocating Black people not being victims based on abstract ideas that have no real application in society. Martin Luther King preached nonviolence when he kept guns all around him. So
basically, you just elaborate on the point that we have talked about, because this is civic engagement. The whole idea is to get our people to engage civically and to get involved. So we in time of the George Floyd murder trial, and this is the post-verdict conversation, and we talked about where we go from here, community of chaos. We talked about the police in the African American community. We talked about the Second Amendment, and you've seen all the analysis and all the point, and these are strategic, intellectual points that you cannot get anywhere else unless you are the prestigious university. So we're here, civic engagement. JT, I want to thank you again, but we made a prediction in November that we was going to have a recap of the 100 days of the Biden administration, and that is next week. And stay tuned for that. We're going to bring out a breakdown about the Biden policy and all the executive action that he have signed in. But today, we're talking about the murder trial of George Floyd and the post-verdict and where we go from here. So, JT, I want to thank you all for coming. It's been a great day, and we have had some breakdown of a lot of topics, a lot of knowledge. People got to digest it.